I have this. She stood in the middle of the parking level, arm raised, gasping for breath. He didn't do it. Then her face changed. Her hand dropped as if something invisible had slipped through her fingers. My phone. Wait, don't take him yet, she cried, stepping forward. I left it over there. One of the officers tightened his grip on Ethan Whitmore's arm. Ma'am, step back, Officer Ruiz said, already moving to guide Ethan toward the patrol car. No, please. Annie's voice cracked. I have it. I really do. I just forgot it on the chair. Oh, please don't take him yet. Ethan lifted his head, rainwater dripping from his hairline, his voice strained but steady. I didn't hit him, he said. I didn't assault anyone. He set me up. Tell it downtown, another officer muttered. He's lying, Annie blurted. He didn't do it. I recorded it. Ruiz hesitated just long enough for hope to flicker. Where's the phone? He asked. I forgot it, Annie said, already backing away. I'll get it, just wait. She turned and ran. Her small boots slapped against the wet concrete as she sprinted toward the entrance. The row of plastic chairs came into view. Then she saw it. The old phone sat exactly where she'd left it, screen dark, forgotten and small. Annie grabbed it with both hands, clutching it tight. I got it, she whispered, like saying it would make everything okay. She turned and ran back. When she reached the officers again, she was breathless, but determined. I have it, she said, holding the phone up. I recorded everything. He didn't hit him, he didn't. Let's see it, Ruiz said. Annie nodded quickly and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. Still nothing. Her fingers trembled. Wait. It was working. I was just using it. She pressed harder. The screen stayed black. No, Annie whispered. Behind her, Harold Pike groaned louder, writhing on the ground as if the world were collapsing around him. He attacked me, Harold cried, clutching his chest. That man assaulted me. I can't breathe, someone help me. His voice cracked in all the right places. People nearby leaned closer, their faces tightening with concern. That's him. Harold pointed weakly toward Ethan. He shoved me. I told him to leave me alone. He just snapped. Ethan's jaw clenched. That's not what happened, he said, louder now. He grabbed me first. He blocked my path and wouldn't let me go. I pulled away, he fell. That's what they all say, one officer replied. I'm telling you the truth. Ethan shot back, frustration breaking through his control. He called me down here. This was planned. Sir, calm down. I am calm, Ethan said, but his voice was tight, strained. I didn't hit him. I didn't attack him. This is a setup. On the ground, Harold let out another strained groan. He's dangerous, he gasped. You saw him, he's out of control. I am not, Ethan snapped. He's lying. Annie's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear anything else. Wait, she said, her voice small but desperate. Please, just wait. She pressed the power button again. Nothing. Her breath hitched. It was working, she said. I recorded it. I saw him. He was talking on the phone. He said he was gonna, he said. Her words tangled. No one moved. The officers looked at her, then at the dark screen in her hands. Ruiz crouched slightly, his tone softening just a fraction. Sweetheart, it's not turning on. I know, Annie said quickly. But it will. It does this sometimes. Please. I swear I recorded it. Behind her, Harold groaned louder, drawing attention back to himself. I need an ambulance, he rasped. My chest. EMS is on the way, another officer said. Ethan looked at Annie, really looked at her. She was small, standing there in a coat too big for her, holding a broken phone like it was the only thing keeping him from being taken away. I didn't do it, he said again, but this time it wasn't aimed at the officers. It was for her. I didn't hit him. He set this up. Annie nodded hard, stepping forward. He's telling the truth, she said, louder now, her voice shaking but rising anyway. He didn't do it. That man he was talking, he said he was going to make it look bad, he said it. Did you hear that? One officer asked quietly. A kid's imagination doesn't hold up in court, the other replied. It's not imagination, Annie cried. I saw it. She pressed the power button again. The screen stayed black. Silence pressed in around her. For the first time, Doubt crept into the edges of the moment, not in what she knew, but in what she could prove. Ruiz stood up slowly. "We can't rely on a device that won't turn on," he said. Ethan exhaled sharply, the sound almost a laugh, but not quite. "Of course you can't," he muttered. "Sir," Ruiz continued, "you're coming with us while we sort this out." Ethan didn't resist, but his shoulders stiffened. "This is a mistake," he said. "You're arresting the wrong man." Harold coughed weakly, still on the ground. "Thank you, officers," he whispered, just loud enough to be heard. Annie felt something inside her twist. This wasn't fair. This wasn't right. And worst of all, no one else could see it. She looked down at the phone in her hands. "I did record it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I know I did." The red and blue lights kept flashing. The parking level had gone quieter, the kind of quiet that follows confusion when people are waiting for someone else to decide what's true. Annie stood there, holding the phone with both hands, her breathing steady now, her eyes locked on the officer. "It was working," she said. "I didn't make it up." Ruiz looked at the device again. "Try it one more time," he said. Annie nodded quickly. She pressed the power button. For a second, nothing. Then, a faint vibration. The screen flickered. A thin, white line cracked across the display, then slowly expanded as the phone came back to life. Annie's eyes lit up. "It's on," she said, almost in disbelief. "It's on." Ruiz leaned closer. "Can you pull up the video?" "Yes." Her fingers moved carefully, like she was handling something fragile and important because she was. She opened the gallery. There it was, the most recent file. She tapped it, the screen filled with shaky footage, dim concrete, parked cars, and then a voice. "You let him get close," Harold Pike's voice came through. "That's the whole point." Ruiz's posture shifted. "Hold it there," he said. Annie steadied the phone. The video continued. "No, I don't need the beginning. I need the end. The part where it looks bad." One of the officers beside Ruiz frowned. "That's him," Annie said quietly. "That's what he said before." On the ground, Harold Pike stopped groaning for just a second. Then the video moved. Annie had shifted the camera slightly, and Harold came into view, pacing, talking into his phone. "The cops see him put hands on me. That's enough," Harold said. "After tonight, he won't be running anything." Ruiz's jaw tightened. "Pause," he said. Annie paused the video. Ruiz straightened slowly and looked at Harold. "Sir," he said, his tone no longer uncertain. "You want to explain that?" Harold blinked, confusion flashing across his face. I don't know what that is," he said weakly. "That's not—" "Play the rest," Ruiz said. Annie pressed play again. The footage continued. Harold straightened his coat. His posture changed. Then, the elevator opened. Ethan stepped out. The two men faced each other. The exchange was brief, tense. Harold moved closer, blocked his path, grabbed his arm. Ethan pulled away. And then, Harold dropped. Just a man falling on purpose. If this moment moved you, take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us why truth still matters. Ruiz exhaled slowly. "That's enough," he said. The other officer immediately released his grip on Ethan's arm. Ethan didn't move right away. He just stood there, watching the screen like he needed to be sure it was real. "I told you," he said quietly. "I told you I didn't hit him." Ruiz nodded once. "Yes, sir, you did." Behind them, Harold shifted, suddenly less certain, less fragile. "That this is out of context," he said quickly. "You don't know what was said before that he threatened me." Ruiz turned to him. "No, sir," he said evenly. "What I see is you planning an incident and then staging it." Harold opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Ruiz looked back at Annie. "You did good," he said. Annie nodded. "I told you I saw it." Ethan finally stepped forward, not toward the officers, toward Annie. He crouched slightly, not all the way, but enough to bring himself closer to her height. "That was brave," he said. Annie shrugged, like it wasn't a big thing. "I just told the truth." Ethan gave a small nod. "Most people don't," he said. Ruiz signaled to the other officer. "Call it in," he said. "We're not detaining him." The officer stepped aside, already speaking into the radio. Ruiz turned back to Ethan. "Sir, you're free to go," he said. "We'll need a statement later. But for now, you're not under arrest." Ethan straightened, rolling his shoulders once, like he was letting the weight of the moment fall off. "I'll cooperate," he said. His eyes shifted to Annie again. "Make sure you keep that video," he added gently. "That might be the most important thing in this entire building tonight." Annie looked down at the phone, then back up. "I will." Ruiz glanced once more at Harold Pike, who no longer looked like a helpless victim. "EMs can still check him out," Ruiz said calmly. "But he's not the one we'll be questioning first." Harold said nothing. Like something that had been twisted had just snapped back into place. Annie stepped back beside her mother, who had just arrived moments earlier and was now taking in the scene with quiet intensity. "What happened?" Monica asked. Annie held up the phone. "It worked," she said simply. "I showed them." Monica looked at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at her daughter. A slow breath left her. "Of course you did," she said. Ethan nodded respectfully toward Monica. "Your daughter just prevented a very serious mistake," he said. Monica placed a hand on Annie's shoulder. "She doesn't like it when things aren't fair," she replied. Ethan's expression softened. "Neither do I," he said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ruiz cleared his throat. "We'll follow up," he said. "But for now, we're done here." The officers stepped away. The noise faded. The space returned to something ordinary again, but not quite the same. Annie looked down at the phone one more time. The crack across the screen was still there. The casing was still worn. Nothing about it looked important. And yet, it had just changed everything. She held it a little tighter, not like something broken anymore, but like something that worked exactly when it needed to. The parking level didn't empty right away. People lingered not out of curiosity anymore, but because something had just shifted, and they weren't quite ready to return to normal. Officer Ruiz spoke quietly into his radio while the other officer stood near Harold Pike, who now sat upright on the stretcher, his earlier weakness replaced by a stiff, guarded silence. The paramedics still checked his vitals, but their movements had lost urgency. Annie stood beside her mother, the phone still in her hands. For the first time since everything began, she wasn't trying to prove anything. It had already been proven. Monica looked down at her daughter, then at the man standing a few steps away, Ethan Whitmore. Up close, he looked different than he had from across the garage, not just because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. He wasn't angry in the way most people would be after something like this. There was frustration, yes, but also restraint. A kind of control that didn't come from pride, but from experience. "You okay?" Monica asked Annie softly. Annie nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Monica's hand rested on her shoulder for a moment longer than usual. Then she stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Whitmore?" she said. Ethan turned. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Annie's mother." Ethan gave a small, respectful nod. "Then I owe you both more than I can explain." Monica shook her head gently. "You don't owe us anything. She just did what was right." Ethan glanced at Annie. "That's rarer than it should be," he said. Annie shifted her weight, looking down at the phone, then back up at him. "They weren't going to believe me," she said. Ethan crouched slightly again, not fully lowering himself this time, but enough to meet her eyes. "They did," he said. "Because of the phone." He considered that for a second. "No," he said. "Because you didn't stop." Annie didn't fully understand that, but she nodded anyway. Across the parking level, Ruiz approached them. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, professional again, but with a quieter tone than before. "We'll need you to come down later for a formal statement." "I'll be there," Ethan replied. Ruiz nodded, then looked at Annie. "You saved us a lot of paperwork tonight," he said. Annie tilted her head. "Is that good?" Ruiz almost smiled. "That's very good." He straightened, then added, "And for the record, you were right to speak up." Annie looked at him carefully, like she was measuring whether that was something she could trust. Then she gave a small nod. Ruiz turned and walked back toward the officers. Harold Pike was being helped off the stretcher now, not because he was suddenly well, but because the situation had changed. Two officers stood close, their attention no longer protective, but watchful. Harold avoided looking at anyone, especially Ethan, especially Annie. That said more than anything he could have. A few minutes later, the garage felt almost ordinary again. The tension had drained out, leaving behind something quieter, heavier but settled. Monica checked the time. "We should get home," she said gently. Annie nodded, but didn't move right away. She looked at Ethan again. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. The question was simple, the kind adults forget how to ask. Ethan paused, then answered honestly. Yes, he said. Because of you. Annie seemed to accept that. Okay, she said. Monica took her hand, and they started toward the exit. Ethan watched them go. For a long moment, then he turned away, pulling his coat tighter around himself as he walked in the opposite direction. But something had shifted, and he knew it. That night, the city moved the way it always did. Traffic lights changed, people filled restaurants, phones rang. Somewhere, news traveled quietly between people who understood what almost happened and what had been stopped. And in a small apartment in Brooklyn, Annie sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of her. It was plugged into the charger now. Alive, working, Monica placed a plate in front of her. Simple food, warm, familiar. Eat, she said. Annie picked up her fork, but didn't start right away. She looked at the phone again. I didn't think it was going to turn on, she said. Monica sat across from her. Sometimes things work when you give them another chance, she replied. Annie thought about that. Then she asked, what if it didn't? Monica didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands on the table. Then you would have still told the truth, she said. And that still matters. But they weren't listening. They started to, Monica said. Annie looked down at her plate. That took too long. Monica nodded slowly. Yes, she said. Sometimes it does. Annie finally took a bite, chewed, swallowed, then looked up again. Why would someone do that? She asked. Make it look like something bad happened when it didn't? Monica leaned back slightly. That's a harder question, she said. Annie waited. Sometimes people want something, Monica continued. Money, power, control, and they don't think they can get it the right way. So they lie? Yes, Annie frowned. That's not fair. No, Monica said. It's not. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then Annie said, he said the man set him up. Monica nodded. Sounds like he was telling the truth. Annie tapped the table lightly with her finger. Then why didn't the police believe him? Monica looked at her carefully. Because what they saw didn't match what he said, she explained. And most people believe what they see first. Annie thought about the video. They didn't see the beginning, she said. That's right. Annie looked at the phone again. I did. Monica reached across the table and gently turned the phone so the screen faced Annie. And you showed them. That sat differently, not heavy, not confusing, just clear. Annie nodded slowly. I helped, she said. You did, Monica replied. Not praise, not exaggeration, just truth. Across the city, Ethan Whitmore sat alone in his office. The lights were low. The skyline stretched beyond the windows, quiet and distant. On his desk sat a single sheet of paper, a name written across the top, Harold Pike. Below it notes, connections, financial ties, and one line circled twice. Brother. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The events of the night replayed, not the accusation, not the shouting, but the moment everything could have gone the other way. A broken phone, a missed chance, a different outcome. He exhaled slowly. Not this time, he said to the empty room. Then his gaze shifted, not to the paper, not to the city, but to something else entirely. A memory, a small voice. I have this. Ethan sat forward again, picked up his pen, and for the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about what almost happened. He was thinking about what came next. Because somewhere in Brooklyn, there was a little girl who didn't walk away when things didn't look fair, and men like him didn't forget things like that. The next morning arrived quietly, not with sirens or urgency, but with sunlight slipping through the blinds and the soft, familiar sounds of a city waking up. Annie sat at the small kitchen table, her legs tucked under the chair, a bowl of cereal in front of her. The old phone rested beside it, plugged into the wall, fully charged now. She glanced at it between bites, not because she needed it anymore, but because she remembered what it had done. Monica moved around the kitchen, packing her lunch into a worn tote bag. The rhythm of her morning was steady, coffee poured, keys checked, shoes by the door. You ready for school? She asked without turning. Yes, ma'am. Annie paused, then added, Can I bring the phone? Monica turned this time, studying her. For what? In case, Annie said. Just in case. Monica didn't answer right away. She walked over, picked up the phone, and turned it over in her hands. The crack across the screen was still there, but now it looked different, like a scar instead of damage. Then she handed it back. "Keep it in your backpack," she said. "And don't go recording people unless you have a good reason." Annie nodded seriously. "I will." Monica gave her a look. "I know you will." Across Manhattan, Ethan Whitmore had already been awake for hours. His office sat high above the city. Quiet, except for the low hum of climate control and the distant movement of traffic below. The walls were lined with glass, giving him a clear view of everything and everyone moving through the streets beneath him. On his desk sat 3 folders. One marked Internal Review, one marked Legal, and one marked Personnel. He opened the last one again. Harold Pike. The name stared back at him. Under it, a network of connections had begun to form overnight: financial transfers, shell companies, board relationships, and one detail that mattered more than the rest: James Whitmore, Ethan's younger brother. Ethan leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. "Of course," he murmured. It wasn't anger that came first. It was recognition, the kind that settles into your bones when something finally makes sense in a way you wish it didn't. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Ethan said. The door opened, and Daniel Reeves stepped inside. Late 50s, crisp suit, former prosecutor, the kind of man who didn't waste words or miss details. "You asked for a background sweep," Daniel said, placing a tablet on the desk. "You were right to." Ethan gestured to the chair. "Tell me." Daniel didn't sit. "Harold Pike has no reason to be anywhere near you," he said. "On paper, he's clean. Retired consultant. Minor investments. No direct ties to your company." Ethan nodded slightly. "And off paper?" Daniel tapped the screen. "Indirect payments over the last 6 months, routed through 3 different entities. All of them trace back to one holding group." Ethan didn't need to ask. "Say it anyway," he said. Daniel met his eyes. "Your brother." Silence followed, heavy, but not surprising. Ethan looked back at the file. "I want everything documented," he said. "Every transaction, every contact." "You're expecting escalation," Daniel said. "I'm expecting persistence," Ethan replied. "He doesn't start something like this without planning the next step." Daniel studied him for a moment. "Then you should consider increasing security." Ethan shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "Not yet." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're taking a risk." Ethan's gaze drifted briefly, not to the window, not to the files, but somewhere else. "No," he said quietly. "Yesterday was the risk." Daniel didn't ask what he meant. Men like him knew when not to. "Understood," he said. "I'll proceed." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing," he added. "The girl." Ethan looked up. "What about her?" Daniel's tone shifted slightly. "Word travels fast in certain circles. There are already questions about what she saw and what she might still have." Ethan's expression hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. "She has nothing to do with this," he said. Daniel held his gaze. "That won't stop people from thinking she does." Another silence. This one sharper, more dangerous. Ethan nodded once. "I'll handle it." That afternoon, Annie sat in her classroom, her pencil tapping lightly against her notebook. Her teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, was explaining fractions at the front of the room. Annie tried to focus. She really did, but her mind kept drifting, back to the parking garage, back to the voices, back to the moment the phone came back on. "You told the truth." She stared at the numbers on the board. They didn't make sense right now, not because they were hard, but because something else felt bigger. "Annie?" She blinked. "Yes?" "What's 3/4 plus 1/4? Mrs. Alvarez asked gently. Annie looked at the board, then answered automatically. 1. Mrs. Alvarez smiled. "Good. Stay with me, okay?" Annie nodded, but she wasn't fully there. Not yet. After school, she walked toward the front gate, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The phone was inside. She could feel it, not physically, but like a presence, like something important she didn't fully understand yet. She reached the sidewalk and stopped. A black car was parked across the street, clean, polished, out of place. A man stood beside it, not in a suit, but close enough. He wasn't looking at the building. He was looking at her, not in a threatening way, but not casually either, just watching. Annie frowned slightly. Then, he stepped forward. "Annie Brooks?" he asked. Her body stilled. "Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves," he said, keeping his distance. I work with Mr. Whitmore. Annie's grip tightened on her backpack strap. Oh, Daniel nodded once. He wanted to thank you, he said. Annie tilted her head. You came all the way here for that. Daniel almost smiled. People like him don't forget things like yesterday. Annie thought about that, then said, I didn't do it for him. I know, Daniel replied. That's why it matters. A pause. Then Annie asked, Is he okay? Daniel nodded. He is. She seemed satisfied with that. Then she added, That other man lied. Yes, Daniel said simply. Annie shifted her weight. I don't like liars. Daniel studied her for a moment. Neither do we. Another pause. Then his tone changed, slightly more careful now. If anyone asks you about what you saw, he said, you tell your mother first. Understand? Annie nodded slowly. I always do. Daniel seemed to accept that. Good, he said. He stepped back toward the car, then stopped. And Annie? She looked up. You did something most adults wouldn't have, he said. Don't let anyone convince you it was small. Annie didn't answer right away. She just nodded. Daniel got into the car. It pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the flow of traffic like it had never been there. Annie stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, then turned and walked home. Her steps were steady, but something had changed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just clear, because somewhere, in a world full of people who believed what they saw first, she had learned something different. Sometimes the truth shows up late. Sometimes it almost gets missed. But when it finally speaks, it matters who's willing to stand there and say, I have this. That evening, the city felt the same, but it wasn't. Not for Annie. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her homework spread out in front of her, the old phone resting beside her notebook like a quiet witness. The television hummed softly in the background. A news anchor spoke in calm, practiced tones, markets, politics, something about corporate leadership disputes. Annie wasn't really listening. Her pencil hovered over a math problem she had already solved. Her eyes kept drifting to the phone. Then, to the memory. The cops see him put hands on me. That's enough. She frowned. It didn't sit right. Not the words, but what they meant. Annie, Monica called from the kitchen. You finish your homework? Yes, ma'am. Then, come eat. Annie gathered her papers slowly and walked to the table. Dinner was simple rice, chicken, something warm that filled the room with a sense of normal life. The kind that didn't ask questions. Monica sat across from her, watching in that quiet way she had. You've been thinking, Monica said. It wasn't a question. Annie nodded. A lot. Monica took a bite, then said, About yesterday? Yes. A pause. Then Annie asked, Are they going to arrest that man? Monica set her fork down. I don't know, she said honestly. But if what you showed is as clear as it sounded, then someone's going to ask him a lot of questions. Annie nodded slowly. He planned it, she said. Before it even happened. Monica leaned back slightly. That's usually how things like that work, she said. People don't just make trouble. They build it. Annie looked down at her plate. Why would someone want to hurt him? She asked. That man didn't even look like he knew him. Monica studied her daughter carefully. Sometimes people don't need to know you to hurt you, she said. Sometimes they just need a reason. What kind of reason? Monica hesitated, then said, The kind that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what you have. Annie thought about that, then quietly said, That's not fair. Monica gave a small, knowing nod. No, she said, it isn't. Across the city, in a building that didn't resemble anything Annie knew, Ethan Whitmore sat at a long conference table with 3 people who spoke in careful, measured tones. Legal counsel, corporate security, and Daniel Reeves. The screen at the end of the room displayed a paused frame from Annie's video. Harold Pike, mid-sentence, clear, undeniable. This is enough to dismantle his claim, one of the attorneys said. But it's not enough to explain motive. It doesn't need to, another added. We only need to prove the incident was staged. Ethan sat still, fingers loosely folded in front of him. That's not enough, he said. The room quieted. It clears me, he continued. It doesn't stop what comes next. Daniel nodded slightly. He's right, he said. This wasn't random. Ethan leaned back. My brother doesn't invest in accidents, he said. He invests in outcomes. The attorney frowned. You're certain he's involved? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. Another silence. Then the attorney asked, do you want to pursue that angle officially? Ethan looked at the paused image on the screen, then said something quieter. No. The room shifted. That would trigger a larger investigation, Daniel pointed out. I know. And, potentially, expose internal vulnerabilities. I know. Daniel studied him. Then what are you doing? Ethan's eyes didn't leave the screen. I'm waiting, he said. For what? For him to make the next move. Later that night, Annie lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet now, the kind of quiet that came after everything important had already been said. The phone rested on the nightstand beside her. Charged. Working. Real. She turned her head slightly, looking at it, then reached over and picked it up, opened the video again, watched it. Not all of it. Just the beginning. The voice. You let him get close. She paused it, stared at the screen, then whispered, you thought nobody would see you. The words felt strange in her mouth. Too grown. Too heavy. She set the phone back down, closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come right away, because somewhere inside her, something had changed. Not in a loud way, not in a way she could explain, but in a way that stayed. She had seen something wrong, and she had said something, and it mattered. The next day, things almost felt normal again. School, lessons, lunch, recess, but not quite, because now, Annie noticed things she hadn't before. Who spoke up, who stayed quiet, who looked away when something didn't feel right. It wasn't that she understood everything. It was that she had started to look, and once you start, you don't really stop. That afternoon, as she walked home, she slowed near the corner of her block. Something felt off. Not dangerous, just different. A car she hadn't seen before, parked too long, engine off, windows slightly tinted. Annie didn't stop. She kept walking, but she noticed the way it was angled, the way no one got out, the way it didn't quite belong. When she reached her building, she glanced back once. The car was still there, still quiet, still watching nothing. Or maybe, watching something. She went inside, didn't say anything. Not yet. Upstairs, Monica was already home, changing out of her work shoes. You're back early, Annie said. Short shift, Monica replied. You okay? Annie hesitated, then said, there's a car outside. Monica looked up. What kind of car? Black, Annie said, just sitting there. Monica walked to the window, looked down. The car was there, still, unmoving. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. How long has it been there? She asked. I don't know, Annie said. But it wasn't there this morning. Monica nodded slowly, then turned back. Stay inside, she said, and keep the door locked. Annie's stomach tightened slightly. Is something wrong? Monica forced a small smile. No, she said. Just being careful. But Annie had learned something recently. Adults didn't always say what they meant. She looked at the phone on the table, then back at the window, then back at her mother. Something wasn't finished, not even close. And somewhere out there, someone else knew it too. The car was still there the next morning. Same spot, same angle, like it had never moved. Annie noticed it before she even stepped fully out of the building. Her hand tightened slightly around the strap of her backpack, the phone resting inside like something she could reach for if needed. Monica noticed it too. She didn't stop walking, didn't stare, just took Annie's hand a little firmer than usual and guided her down the sidewalk. Keep walking, she said quietly. I am, Annie replied. They passed the car. The windows were still tinted. No movement inside. No sound, just stillness. But Annie had learned something important. Stillness didn't always mean safe. At the corner, Monica paused. You go straight to school, she said. Don't stop anywhere. I'll pick you up today. You always do, Annie said. Monica gave her a look. Today I mean it differently. Annie nodded. I understand. Monica leaned down, kissed her forehead, then straightened. Call me if anything feels wrong. I will. Annie turned and walked. She didn't look back, but she felt it, that quiet awareness, like something had shifted just enough to matter. Across the city, Ethan Whitmore stood near the window of his office, watching the morning traffic crawl between glass towers. Daniel Reeves stood behind him, tablet in hand. The car's been identified, Daniel said. Ethan didn't turn. Go on. Registered to a shell company, Daniel continued. But the driver isn't using much discretion. We've got eyes on him. Ethan's gaze remained on the city. Watching them? Yes. A pause. From a distance. Another pause. Then Ethan said, "That distance just got smaller." Daniel didn't argue. "Do you want it handled?" he asked. Ethan finally turned. "No," he said. "Not yet." Daniel studied him. "They're not part of this," Ethan added. "They don't get pulled into it because of me." Daniel nodded slowly. Understood. But his expression said something else. Something unspoken. That line had already been crossed. At school, Annie tried to focus. She really did. But the world felt louder now. Not in sound. In meaning. Every voice carried a little more weight. Every glance lasted a little longer. Every quiet thing felt like it might not be quiet at all. During recess, she sat on the edge of the playground bench, watching the other kids run and laugh. Her friend Lila dropped down beside her. "You're not playing today?" Lila asked. "I am," Annie said. But she didn't move. Lila followed her gaze. "What are you looking at?" Annie hesitated, then said, "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything she didn't know how to explain yet. That afternoon, Monica was already waiting outside the school. Not in her usual spot. Closer. Watching. Annie saw her immediately. That made something inside her settle. Just a little. "You came early," Annie said as she reached her. Monica nodded. "I said I would." Annie glanced across the street. The black car was there again. Different position. Same presence. She didn't point it out this time. She didn't need to. Monica had already seen it. "Let's go," Monica said. They walked together, side by side. Not rushed, not slow, just steady. When they reached their building, Monica paused before unlocking the door. She looked back once. The car remained. Still, watching. Then she opened the door and ushered Annie inside. Upstairs, the apartment felt smaller than usual. Not physically, but in the way quiet spaces feel when something outside them isn't right. Monica locked the door, checked it twice, then turned to Annie. "Stay here," she said. "I'm making a call." Annie nodded. She sat at the table, pulling the phone from her backpack. She didn't open the video. Not this time. Instead, she stared at the reflection in the cracked screen. A small face. Serious. Thinking. From the other room, Monica's voice carried low, controlled. "Yes," she was saying. "It's the same car." A pause. "No, I don't think it's random." Another pause. "I understand." Annie listened, not because she wanted to, because she needed to. Then Monica came back. Her expression had settled into something firm. "We're going out," she said. "Where?" "To see someone who can help." Annie stood. "Is it about the car?" Monica didn't answer directly. "It's about making sure you're safe," she said. That was enough. An hour later, they stood in the lobby of a building that felt very different from anything Annie was used to. Quiet, polished, controlled. A man at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" Monica stepped forward. "My name is Monica Brooks," she said. "I need to speak with Daniel Reeves." The man hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." Another pause. Then Annie stepped forward. "He knows me," she said. The man looked at her. Something about her tone, calm, certain, made him pick up the phone. A short conversation. A nod. Then, "You can go up." Minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Daniel Reeves was already waiting. He took one look at Monica, then at Annie, and he understood. "You saw it too," he said. Monica nodded. "The car." Daniel stepped aside. "Come in." They entered his office. The door closed behind them. "Start from the beginning," Daniel said. Monica did. Clear. Direct. No exaggeration. Just facts. When she finished, the room was quiet. Daniel leaned back slightly. "They're watching," he said. "Why?" Annie asked. Daniel looked at her. "Because you saw something they didn't want seen," he said. Annie held his gaze. "I already showed it." "Yes," Daniel said. "And now they want to know what else you might do." Annie thought about that, then said something simple. "I'm not going to lie." Daniel nodded. "I didn't think you would." Monica crossed her arms. "So what happens now?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Now we make sure they understand something clearly." "What?" Monica asked. Daniel's tone shifted. Calmer, sharper. "They picked the wrong person to watch," he said. Annie looked between them, then quietly added, "and the wrong person to lie about." Daniel met her eyes. And for the first time, he smiled. Daniel Reeves didn't rush. Men like him understood that urgency often made things worse, not better. He walked to the window, hands resting lightly behind his back, eyes scanning the street below like he was reading something invisible to everyone else. "They're not professionals," he said after a moment. Monica frowned. "What do you mean?" "If they were," Daniel continued, "you wouldn't have noticed them." Annie sat quietly, listening. "So they're sloppy?" she asked. Daniel turned slightly, looking at her. "They're careful," he said, "but not experienced enough to disappear." "That's good, right?" Annie said. "It means we can see them," Daniel replied. "But it also means they're being told to stay visible." Monica's expression tightened. "As a message?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Silence settled in the room. Then Annie asked the question no one else had yet. "To who?" Daniel looked at her, then answered plainly. "To you." Monica exhaled slowly. "She's 6 years old." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "They don't care about that," he said. "They care about what she represents." Annie tilted her head slightly. "I didn't do anything special," she said. Daniel almost smiled again. "That's exactly why it matters," he said. Across town, in a quiet office lined with dark wood and muted light, another conversation was happening. James Whitmore stood near his desk, one hand resting on the edge, the other holding a glass he hadn't touched. "You said it was handled," he said. The man across from him shifted slightly. "It should have been." James didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. "Should have been," he repeated. A pause. Then he set the glass down. "Let me explain something to you," he said calmly. "Failure isn't the problem." The man swallowed. "Exposure is." Another silence. James walked slowly around the desk. "That little girl," he continued, "was not part of the plan." "No, sir. And now she is." "Yes, sir." James stopped, looked directly at him. "So now we adjust," he said. "How?" James's expression didn't change. "We remind people how the world works," he said. "What matters, what doesn't. And the girl?" James's tone stayed even. "We don't touch her." The man blinked, surprised. "Then what?" "We don't touch her," James repeated. "We make everything around her uncomfortable." A pause. "Enough that someone else makes the decision for her." The man nodded slowly. "I understand." James turned away. "Good," he said. "Because this time, I don't want improvisation." Back in Daniel's office, the air had shifted. Not tense, focused. Monica stood near Annie now, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "What do we do?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to his desk and picked up his phone. Then he paused, looked at Annie. "You still have the video?" he asked. Annie nodded. "Yes." "Good," Daniel said. "Don't delete it. Don't send it to anyone. And don't show it unless your mother or I tell you to." Annie nodded again. "I understand." Daniel studied her for a second longer, then said, "I believe you do." He turned and made the call. It rang once, twice. Then, "Reeves," Ethan's voice came through. "It's happening," Daniel said. A pause. "How close?" "Closer than they should be." Another pause. Then Ethan said, "Where are they now?" "With me." Silence. Short. Controlled. "I'm coming," Ethan said. The line went dead. Annie looked up. "Was that him?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." "Is he mad?" Daniel considered that. "No," he said. "He's aware." Annie didn't fully understand that, but she felt it, like something was about to move. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. Ethan Whitmore stepped out. No rush, no wasted motion, but the energy around him felt different than before. Sharper, more deliberate. He walked into the office, his eyes immediately finding Annie. "Are you all right?" he asked. Annie nodded. "Yes." Ethan looked at Monica. "Ma'am?" Monica gave a small nod in return. "Mr. Whitmore." Then Ethan turned to Daniel. "Tell me everything." Daniel did. Clear. Efficient. When he finished, Ethan stood still for a moment, thinking. Then he asked, "They made contact?" "No," Daniel said. "Just presence." Ethan nodded. "That's intentional." Annie spoke up. "They were watching," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Yes," he said. "They were." "Why?" she asked again. This time, he answered differently. "Because they don't like losing," he said. Annie thought about that, then said, "That's not a good reason." Ethan's expression softened just slightly. "No," he said. Monica crossed her arms. "So what happens now?" Ethan looked between them, then said something simple. "Now they stop." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that?" Ethan's voice didn't change. "By making it clear that this doesn't go any further." Annie tilted her head. "How do you do that?" Ethan met her eyes. "You don't argue with people like that," he said. "You show them the cost." Annie didn't look away. "Is that fair?" Ethan paused, then answered honestly. "No," he said. "But neither is what they're doing." Silence followed. Then Annie said something quiet, but telling the truth worked. Ethan held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "It did." A small pause. "Sometimes," he added. "It just needs help." Outside, the black car was no longer there, but that didn't mean anything was over. Inside the room, something had shifted again. Not fear, not confusion. Direction. Annie looked down at the phone in her hands, then back up. "I'm not going to stop," she said. No hesitation, no doubt. Ethan nodded once. "I know," he said. And this time, everyone in the room understood exactly what that meant. Ethan didn't leave right away. That, more than anything, told Daniel how serious things had become. Men like Ethan Whitmore were always moving, meeting, deciding, controlling outcomes before anyone else realized there was something to control. But now he stood still, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, his attention fixed not on the city, not on the strategy, but on Annie. "You said you're not going to stop," he said. Annie nodded. "Yes." Ethan studied her for a moment, not like an adult looking at a child, like someone measuring something real. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked. Annie thought for a second, then answered the only way she knew how. "It means I don't change what I saw," she said. "Even if people don't like it." Daniel exhaled quietly. Monica didn't move. Ethan gave a small nod. "That's a good place to start," he said. "Start?" Annie asked. Ethan straightened slightly. "Truth doesn't end with one moment," he said. "It tends to attract attention. Not all of it good." Annie looked down at the phone in her hands, then back up. "I already got attention," she said. Ethan almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "You did." Daniel stepped forward, shifting the conversation. "We need to think about exposure," he said. "Right now, this is contained. Parking garage, internal report, a few officers, and whoever's watching," Monica added. Daniel nodded. "Exactly." Ethan walked slowly toward the window. "They were testing boundaries," he said, "seeing how far they could push." "And now?" Daniel asked. Ethan didn't turn. "Now they're deciding what to do with the answer." Annie frowned slightly. "What answer?" Ethan glanced back at her. "You," he said. That landed quietly, but it stayed. Across the city, James Whitmore sat alone now. The man he had been speaking to earlier was gone. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock mounted high on the wall. On his desk lay a tablet. The screen displayed a paused video. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough. A voice. "You let him get close. That's the whole point." James tapped the screen once. The video played for 3 seconds. Then he stopped it. Again, then again, watching the same moment, not for what it showed, but for what it meant. A small, almost imperceptible shift passed through his expression. Not anger, not frustration, calculation. Then he reached for his phone. Dialed. When the call connected, he spoke quietly. "No more cars." A pause. "They've noticed." Another pause. "No. We don't escalate yet." He listened, then said, "We change approach." A longer pause. Then, softer. "Pressure doesn't always come from outside." The line went dead. James set the phone down. And for the first time, he smiled. Back in Daniel's office, the air felt steadier. Not safe, but clearer. "What do you need from us?" Monica asked. Ethan turned back fully now. "Consistency," he said. "Routine. No sudden changes. No reactions that give them leverage." Monica nodded. "I can do that." Ethan looked at Annie. "And you," he added. "Keep doing exactly what you've been doing." Annie blinked. "That's it? For now." She considered that, then asked, "What if they try something else?" Daniel answered this time, "Then we're ready for it." Annie looked between them. You sound like you already know they will. Daniel didn't deny it. People like that don't walk away after one failure, he said. Annie nodded slowly. I don't either. Ethan met her eyes again. I know, he said. The ride home felt different, not because anything had changed outside, but because Annie was thinking differently inside. She sat in the back seat of the car Daniel had arranged, her backpack beside her, the phone in her lap. Monica sat next to her, quiet, watching, protecting. You okay? Monica asked. Annie nodded. Yes. A pause. Then she said, he talks like everything is a plan. Monica glanced at her. Mr. Whitmore? Annie nodded. Yes. Monica thought about that. People like him have to think that way, she said. Too many things depend on what they do next. Annie looked out the window. What about people like us? Monica smiled faintly. We think about what's right, she said. And then we do it. Annie considered that, then said, that sounds simpler. Monica let out a soft breath. It is, she said. But it's not always easier. When they reached home, the street looked normal. The black car was gone. The sidewalk was just a sidewalk again. But Annie didn't relax completely, because she had learned something important. Just because you don't see something doesn't mean it isn't there. Inside, the apartment felt the same. Warm, familiar, safe at least in the ways it had always been. Annie set her backpack down, placed the phone on the table, then stopped. She picked it up again, opened the video, watched the first few seconds, then paused it. Not because she needed proof anymore, but because she needed to remember. You said you're not going to stop. She looked at her reflection in the cracked screen. I'm not, she said quietly. Later that night, as the city dimmed into its slower rhythm, Annie lay in bed again. The phone rested beside her. But this time, she wasn't worried it wouldn't turn on. She wasn't worried it would fail her, because she understood something new now. The phone wasn't what saved him. She was. Not because she had something special, but because she didn't step back, didn't stay quiet, didn't wait for someone else to speak first. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since everything began, she felt steady, not because the problem was gone, but because she knew where she stood in it. And somewhere, in another part of the city, two men were already planning their next moves, one building pressure, one preparing to stop it, and between them, a 6-year-old girl who had already changed the outcome once. The only question now was, what would she change next? The next shift didn't come with noise. It came with silence. Not the peaceful kind Annie was used to, the kind that wrapped around bedtime stories and soft lights, but a quieter, sharper silence. The kind that made small things stand out, like the phone ringing when it usually didn't. It happened just after dinner. Monica was rinsing dishes at the sink when the sound cut through the apartment sharp. Unexpected. She froze for half a second, then dried her hands and walked over. Annie watched from the table. Unknown number. Monica murmured. She didn't answer right away. She let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. Annie tilted her head. Why didn't you pick up? Monica set the phone down. Because people who need you usually leave a message, she said. A second later, the phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail. Monica hesitated, then pressed play. A man's voice filled the room. Calm, measured, too controlled. Miss Brooks, he said. I believe we have something to discuss. Annie sat up straighter. Monica didn't move. You and your daughter were present yesterday. The voice continued. And while we all appreciate honesty, sometimes misunderstandings create unnecessary complications. Annie frowned. That didn't sound like a misunderstanding. That video, the man went on, may not show everything as clearly as it seems. And children, well, they don't always understand what they're seeing. Monica's jaw tightened. You seem like a reasonable woman, the voice said. I'm sure you'd agree that it's better to avoid turning a small incident into something larger than it needs to be. A pause. Then, call me back. Let's resolve this properly. The message ended. Silence filled the apartment again. But this time, it wasn't empty. Annie looked at her mother. That man is lying, she said. Monica didn't answer immediately. She stared at the phone for a long moment, then said quietly, yes. Annie leaned forward. He wants us to say it didn't happen, she said. Yes, but it did happen. Monica looked at her. I know. Annie's voice was steady. Then we don't call him back. Monica exhaled slowly. No, she said. We don't. Across the city, Daniel Reeves listened to the same message. He had already received a copy. Ethan stood nearby, arms folded, expression unreadable. They're shifting, Daniel said. Of course they are, Ethan replied. Daniel set the phone down. Soft pressure first, he continued. Polite tone. Reasonable language. Make it sound like cooperation. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. They want her to doubt herself. Daniel nodded, and the mother to make the decision for her. A pause. Then Ethan said, They miscalculated. Daniel glanced at him. How? Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, They think pressure creates silence. A small pause. They're about to learn it creates something else. Back in the apartment, Annie picked up her phone. She opened the video again, watched the beginning, then paused it. They can't change this, she said. Monica sat down across from her. No, she said. They can't, but they're trying. Yes. Annie thought for a moment, then asked, Why didn't he just tell the truth? Monica shook her head slightly. Because the truth doesn't give him what he wants, she said. Annie nodded. That's a bad reason. Monica almost smiled. It usually is. A quiet moment passed. Then Annie asked something different. Are you scared? Monica looked at her. Really looked. Then answered honestly. A little, she said. Annie nodded. Me too. Another pause. Then Annie added, But I'm not changing my mind. Monica reached across the table and took her hand. Neither am I. The next day, the pressure changed again. Not louder, just closer. At school, Annie noticed it first in small ways. A teacher she didn't know standing near the classroom door longer than usual. A man in the hallway talking quietly with the principal. A glance that lasted just a second too long. Nothing anyone could point to, but enough to feel. At recess, Lila ran up to her. Hey, she said. My mom said something about you being on the news. Annie blinked. I'm not on the news. Not yet, Lila said. But she said something happened. Annie looked away. I just helped someone, she said. Lila grinned. That's cool. Annie didn't smile back, because she was starting to understand something. Helping someone wasn't always simple after it happened. That afternoon, when Monica arrived to pick her up, she didn't wait outside. She was already inside the school office, talking, calm, but firm. Annie stepped in. Hey, she said. Monica turned immediately. You ready? Annie nodded. They walked out together. No rush, no panic, but no hesitation either. Outside, the street looked normal again. Too normal. Annie glanced around. No black car, no watchers, just people, cars, noise, life. But she didn't relax, because now she knew. Pressure didn't always look like pressure. Sometimes it looked like nothing at all. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Annie sat by the window. The phone rested in her lap. She didn't open the video this time. She didn't need to. Instead, she thought about the voice on the message. You seem like a reasonable woman. She frowned. That's not what reasonable means, she said softly. From the kitchen, Monica heard her. What's not? She asked. Annie looked over. Trying to make someone say something that's not true, she said. That's not reasonable. Monica leaned against the doorway. No, she said. It isn't. Annie nodded, then said something quieter. They think we're going to change. Monica walked over, sat beside her. They're hoping, she said. Annie looked down at the phone, then back up. Well, she said simply. They're wrong. Monica smiled faintly. Yes, she said. They are. Across the city, Ethan stood once more by the window in his office. The message had been heard. The move had been made. And now, the line had been crossed. He picked up his phone, dialed. When Daniel answered, Ethan said only one thing. Enough. A pause. Then Daniel replied, I was waiting for you to say that. Ethan's voice didn't change. Set it in motion. He ended the call. And for the first time since the parking garage, he wasn't reacting anymore. He was moving, because pressure had been applied. And now, it was going to be answered. The shift, when it came, was invisible. No announcements, no warnings, just movement, quiet, precise, and deliberate. Daniel Reeves didn't call it retaliation. He called it correction. It started early, before most offices opened, before traffic reached its usual rhythm. Inside a federal building downtown, A set of documents changed hands. Clean copies, verified timestamps, transaction records, shell companies, payment trails, all leading in one direction, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. A name sat at the center of it, James Whitmore. At the same time, a different kind of conversation was happening in a private conference room high above the city. 3 board members sat across from Ethan. No assistants, no distractions, just decisions. "We need clarity," one of them said. "You'll have it," Ethan replied. Another leaned forward. "There are rumors," he said carefully. "Internal instability, external pressure. If this escalates, it won't," Ethan said, not forcefully, not defensively, just certain. The third board member studied him. "You sound confident." Ethan met his gaze. "I am." A pause. Then he added, "Because I know where the pressure is coming from." That changed the room. "How certain?" the first asked. Ethan slid a folder across the table. Daniel's work. Documented. Structured. Clear. The board member opened it. "Read." Then looked up. "This is serious." "Yes," Ethan said. Another silence. Then, "What's your move?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm not responding to the pressure," he said. "I'm removing it." Across the city, James Whitmore received a call he hadn't expected. Not from an employee, not from a contact, from someone above him. The kind of call that didn't come twice. "James," the voice said, calm but firm. "We need to talk." James leaned back slightly. "About what?" A pause. Then, "Your recent activities." James's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "I'm not sure what you mean." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "I think you do." The line didn't disconnect. It waited. James exhaled slowly, then said, "I assume this isn't a casual conversation." "No," the voice replied. "It isn't." Back in Brooklyn, Annie sat at the table again, her homework open, her pencil moving steadily. From the outside, everything looked normal, and for the first time in days, it almost felt that way. Monica moved through the apartment, quieter now, not tense, just aware. There had been no more calls, no more cars, no more messages. That didn't mean anything was over, but it meant something had changed. "Annie," Monica said, "you finish your reading?" "Almost." A pause. Then Annie asked, "Do you think they stopped?" Monica leaned against the counter. "I think something made them pause," she said. Annie looked up. "Like what?" Monica smiled faintly, like someone pushing back. Annie thought about that, then nodded. "That makes sense." Across the city, Daniel stood in Ethan's office again. "It's moving," he said. Ethan didn't look up from the document in front of him. "How far?" "Far enough," Daniel replied. "The right people have the right information." Ethan set the paper down. "And him?" Daniel's expression stayed neutral. "He's contained for now." Ethan nodded slowly. "That won't last." "No," Daniel agreed. "But it doesn't need to." A pause. Then Daniel added, "You shifted the balance." Ethan leaned back slightly. "No," he said. "I corrected it." That evening, something subtle changed again. Not in offices, not in boardrooms, but in the smallest place that mattered most. Annie's apartment. The air felt lighter, not because everything was safe, but because something unseen had eased. Annie noticed it without knowing how to explain it. She sat by the window, the phone beside her, untouched. "I think they stopped watching," she said. Monica glanced at her. "Maybe." Annie looked outside. The street was just a street again. People walking, cars passing. No stillness that didn't belong. No silence that felt wrong. "They were waiting for us to do something," Annie said. Monica nodded slowly. "Yes, but we didn't." "No." Annie turned back. "Someone else did." Monica met her eyes. "Yes." Later that night, Annie lay in bed again. But this time, she slept. Not deeply, not without dreams, but without that tight feeling in her chest, because something important had settled. Not the whole story, not everything, but enough. Across the city, Ethan stood alone in his office once more. The lights were low. The city stretched out beneath him, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at something else. The phone in his hand, a paused image, a small frame from a video, a man on a phone, a voice caught in the act, and just at the edge of the frame, a reflection, a small figure, barely visible, but there. Ethan studied it for a long moment, then said quietly, "You didn't just stop it." A pause. "You exposed it." He set the phone down, and for the first time since this began, he allowed himself to think beyond the immediate problem. Because this wasn't just about stopping something. It was about what came after, about what changed, and about the one person who had shifted everything without even trying to. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a 6-year-old girl slept peacefully, unaware of the scale, unaware of the consequences, unaware that in rooms she would never see, people were already adjusting their plans because of her. But one thing was certain, this wasn't the end. It was the point where everything turned. Because pressure had been answered, truth had held, and now, the people who had tried to control the story were being forced to face something they didn't expect. Not resistance, not retaliation, something far more dangerous. Clarity. The silence didn't last. It never did. But when it broke this time, it didn't come from outside. It came from inside the system. 3 days later, the story surfaced. Not loudly, not as a headline, but as a quiet segment buried in a midday financial broadcast. Sources confirm that an internal investigation into attempted corporate manipulation is now underway, the anchor said calmly. While no formal charges have been announced, several individuals connected to the case are under review. Annie wasn't watching, but somewhere across the city, people were, and they understood what it meant. Not exposure, not yet, but movement. At school, Annie sat at her desk, listening as Mrs. Alvarez explained a reading assignment. The classroom felt normal again, predictable, safe, but Annie had learned something important. Normal didn't mean unchanged. She raised her hand. "Yes, Annie?" Mrs. Alvarez said. "What happens after the truth comes out?" Annie asked. The question caught the room off guard. Mrs. Alvarez paused, then smiled gently. "Well," she said, "that depends. On what? On what people do with it." Annie nodded slowly. That made sense. Across town, Daniel Reeves closed a folder and set it aside. "It's starting," he said. Ethan stood by the window again, but this time, he wasn't watching the city. He was thinking, "How far?" Ethan asked. "Far enough that it can't be ignored," Daniel replied. "Not far enough to be finished." Ethan nodded. "That's fine." Daniel studied him. "You expected resistance." "I expect patterns," Ethan said. A pause. "And this one isn't over." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't need to. At the same time, James Whitmore sat in a room that no longer felt entirely under his control. 2 men sat across from him. Not hostile, not aggressive, but firm, measured. "We need clarification on several financial movements," one of them said. James leaned back slightly. "I run multiple divisions," he replied. "Movement is constant. This is different." A document slid across the table. James glanced at it, then back up. "I don't see a problem." The second man spoke this time. "You're not supposed to." A pause. Then, "But we do." Silence followed. James didn't react outwardly, but something inside the room shifted. Not pressure. Recognition. The kind that comes when a game changes and you're no longer the one controlling it. Back in Brooklyn, Annie walked home with Monica, her steps steady, her backpack bouncing lightly with each movement. The street felt ordinary again, but Annie didn't take that for granted anymore. "They talked about something at school today," she said. "What about?" Monica asked. "The truth," Annie replied. Monica smiled faintly. "That's a big topic." Annie nodded. "They said it depends on what people do with it." Monica glanced at her. "That's true." Annie thought for a moment. "Are we doing the right thing with it?" Monica didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "We're not changing it." "That's a good start." Annie nodded. "I think so too." That evening, something unexpected happened. The phone rang again. Monica looked at it. Different number. Same feeling. She answered this time. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice. Not the same one as before. This one was quieter, more controlled. "Miss Brooks," the man said. "I'd like to apologize." Monica didn't speak. "For the message you received earlier," he continued. "It was inappropriate." Annie looked up from the table. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Monica's voice stayed steady. "And who is this?" A pause. "That's not important," the man said. "What matters is that the situation is being corrected." Monica's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Corrected how?" Another pause. "By making sure it doesn't continue." Annie shook her head slightly. "No, that wasn't right." Monica heard it too. That sounds like avoidance, she said. It's resolution, the man replied. Monica didn't raise her voice. Resolution involves the truth, she said. A longer pause. Then, yes, the man said. It does. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, your daughter did something significant, he added. Annie sat still, listening. Monica didn't respond. Make sure she understands that, the man said. Then the call ended. Monica lowered the phone slowly. Annie spoke first. That wasn't an apology. Monica nodded. No, she said. It wasn't. What was it? Monica thought for a moment, then answered simply. It was someone realizing they can't change what already happened. Annie leaned back slightly. That's good. Monica smiled faintly. Yes, she said. It is. Across the city, Ethan stood in the same place he had been standing all week. But something was different now. Not the room. Not the view. Him. Daniel entered quietly. It's moving faster than expected, he said. Ethan nodded once. That's what happens when the truth doesn't bend. Daniel studied him. You're thinking ahead. Yes. To what? Ethan turned slightly. To what comes after this, he said. A pause. And her. Daniel didn't need clarification. The girl, he said. Ethan nodded. She's part of this now, he said. Whether she intended to be or not. Daniel crossed his arms. She didn't ask for it. No, Ethan said, but she handled it anyway. A small silence. Then Daniel asked, what are you planning? Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, something different, he said. That night, Annie sat by the window again. The phone rested beside her, but she didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked outside, at the street, at the people, at everything that kept moving, even when something important had happened. She thought about the question she asked earlier. What happens after the truth comes out? She didn't have a full answer, but she had part of one. You keep going, she said softly. Not for anyone else, just for herself. And somewhere, across the city, others were beginning to understand the same thing, because the truth had done its job. Now, it was changing everything that came after. The next step didn't come from fear. It came from decision. 3 days after the second phone call, Annie's life looked, on the surface, exactly the same. School, homework, dinner, sleep. But beneath that rhythm, something had changed, not in the world, but in how she moved through it. She noticed more, not just what people said, but what they didn't. Not just what was loud, but what stayed quiet. And most of all, she noticed when something didn't feel right. That morning, in class, Mrs. Alvarez handed out a reading worksheet. Today, she said, we're going to talk about perspective. Annie tilted her head slightly. Perspective. That means, the teacher continued, how different people can see the same situation in different ways. A few students nodded. One boy raised his hand. So, like when two people argue and both think they're right? Exactly, Mrs. Alvarez said. Annie looked down at her paper, then slowly raised her hand. Yes, Annie? What if one person is actually right? She asked. The room went quiet. Mrs. Alvarez smiled gently. That can happen too, she said. But it's not always easy to prove. Annie nodded. I know. Across the city, something far less simple was unfolding. Inside a federal office, the investigation had moved from quiet review to active pressure. Documents were no longer just being read. They were being questioned, verified, cross-checked, and in some cases, challenged. James Whitmore sat across from two investigators again, but this time, the tone had changed. Less polite, more direct. We've identified multiple financial links between you and Harold Pike, one of them said. James didn't respond immediately. Indirect connections, he said calmly. That's not illegal. No, the investigator agreed. But coordinated timing is suspicious. A file was opened. Pages turned. We also have records indicating prior contact before the incident in the parking structure. James's eyes narrowed slightly. That doesn't prove intent. The second investigator leaned forward. No, he said. But combined with witness footage, it suggests planning. A pause. Then, you want to explain that? Silence, not hesitation. Calculation. James leaned back. You're building a narrative, he said. The investigator met his gaze. No, he replied. We're uncovering one. At the same time, Ethan Whitmore stood in a smaller room than usual. No glass walls, no skyline, just a table. And Daniel, you're being asked to testify, Daniel said. Ethan nodded. I expected that. They're moving faster now, Daniel added, which means he's running out of time. Ethan's expression didn't change. Good. Daniel watched him carefully. You're not satisfied. Ethan glanced at him. This isn't about satisfaction, he said. It's about certainty. A pause. And we're not there yet. Daniel nodded slowly. You want more than just stopping him? Ethan didn't answer directly. I want it to be clear, he said. For everyone. Daniel understood. That meant not just winning, but ending it. Completely. Back in Brooklyn, Annie sat at the table again, her worksheet in front of her. The question at the top read, describe a situation where two people see the same event differently. She stared at it, then picked up her pencil and began to write. One person can see something happen. Another person can say something different happened. But that doesn't mean both are true. She paused, then added, the truth doesn't change just because someone wants it to. She looked at what she wrote, then nodded. That felt right. That afternoon, something unexpected happened again. Not a phone call, not a car, a letter. Monica found it slipped under the apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just a plain envelope. She picked it up slowly. Annie watched from the table. What is it? I don't know, Monica said. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Short. Clear. Some things are better left alone. Monica's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly. Annie stood up. What does it say? Monica hesitated, then handed it to her. Annie read it. Once, then again, her brow furrowed. That doesn't make sense, she said. Monica leaned against the counter. It makes sense to them, she replied. Annie looked up. They're still trying. Yes. Annie folded the paper carefully. Not angrily, not scared, just thoughtfully. They think we're going to stop. Monica nodded. Yes. Annie placed the letter on the table, then said something simple. We're not. Monica looked at her, then gave a small, steady smile. No, she said. We're not. Across the city, Daniel held the same message. A copy had already reached him. They're getting impatient, he said. Ethan stood nearby. Good. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why is that good? Ethan looked at the paper. Because patience means control, he said. And they're starting to lose it. Daniel considered that, then nodded. That tracks. A pause. Then he added, do you want to respond? Ethan shook his head. No. Not even indirectly. No. Daniel frowned slightly. Why? Ethan's voice stayed calm. Because this isn't where the response happens, he said. A beat. It happens where it matters. That night, Annie sat by the window again. The letter lay beside her. The phone on the other side. Two things. One trying to change something. One that already had. She picked up the letter. Looked at it one more time. Some things are better left alone. She shook her head slightly. No, she said quietly. Not this. She folded it again, set it aside, then picked up the phone. Not to watch the video. Not to prove anything. Just to hold it. Because now she understood something deeper than before. Truth wasn't just about what you saw. It was about what you chose to stand by. And once you chose, you didn't step back. No matter who asked. No matter how they asked. No matter how quiet the pressure became. Somewhere else in the city, decisions were being made. Not loud, not visible, but final. Because the truth had already surfaced. The pressure had already failed. And now, the people who tried to control the story were running out of ways to change it. And in the center of it all, a 6-year-old girl sat quietly by a window, holding on to something no one could take from her. Not a phone, not a video, something stronger. Certainty. The final shift didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded, quietly, inevitably, like something that had been decided long before anyone said it out loud. It began with a call. Not to Annie, not to Monica, but to Ethan. Daniel stood across from him, listening as the voice on the other end spoke in a tone that no longer asked questions. It confirmed, based on the evidence provided, we are moving forward with formal charges, the voice said. Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't react, just listened. We'll need your full cooperation moving forward. You'll have it, Ethan replied. A pause. Then, and Mr. Whitmore, this is going to be public. Ethan glanced briefly at Daniel. I understand, he said. The call ended. The room stayed still. Daniel exhaled. "That's it," he said. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Not victory. Not relief. Just completion of a step. Across the city, James Whitmore sat in a room that no longer belonged to him. Not in the way it used to. The table was the same. The chairs were the same. But the control had shifted. A folder sat in front of him. Thicker now. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "You understand what this means," one of the investigators said. James leaned back slightly. "I understand what you think it means." The investigator didn't respond immediately. "Then, it means you're out of time." Silence followed. James looked at the folder, then back up. For the first time, there was no calculation. Just acknowledgement. Not of guilt, but of outcome. "You're making a mistake, he said. The investigator shook his head. "No," he replied. "You already made it." Back in Brooklyn, Annie sat at the table again. But this time, she wasn't thinking about the phone, or the letter, or the man in the parking garage. She was finishing her homework, carefully, neatly, like everything was exactly where it should be. Monica watched her from across the room. There was a difference now, not in Annie's behavior, but in the space around her. Less tension, less waiting, like something heavy had finally been set down. "You're quiet," Monica said. Annie looked up. "I'm thinking." "About what?" Annie paused, then said, "About what happens next." Monica smiled faintly. "That's a good question." Annie tapped her pencil lightly. "I think things go back to normal." Monica tilted her head slightly. "Maybe," she said. Annie frowned. "You don't think so?" Monica considered her answer, then said gently, "I think things go forward." Annie thought about that, then nodded. "That sounds better." Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened again. But this time, it wasn't pressure. It was acknowledgement. There was a knock on the door. Monica opened it. Daniel Reeves stood there, alone. No urgency, no tension, just presence. "May I come in?" he asked. Monica stepped aside. "Of course." Annie stood up from the table. "Hi," she said. Daniel nodded. "Hello, Annie." He stepped inside, looked around briefly, not judging, just observing. Then he turned back. "It's over," he said. Simple, clear. Monica crossed her arms slightly. "Completely?" Daniel nodded. "As much as things like this ever are," he said. A pause. "Formal charges are being filed." Annie blinked. "Against who?" Daniel looked at her. "The man who planned it," he said. Annie nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Daniel studied her for a moment. "You're not surprised?" "No," Annie said. He was lying. Daniel almost smiled. "Yes," he said. He was. Monica stepped forward. "And the other calls? The messages?" Daniel shook his head slightly. "Those stop now," he said. Annie tilted her head. "Because they have to?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because they don't work anymore." That landed differently, not as relief, as understanding. Annie nodded. "Okay." Daniel reached into his coat, pulled out something small. A new phone. Simple, uncracked, functional. He placed it on the table. "This is for you," he said. Annie looked at it, then at her old one, then back at him. "Why?" Daniel answered carefully. "Because the one you have did something important," he said. "But you shouldn't have to rely on something broken." Annie didn't reach for it. Not yet. She looked down at her old phone, ran her fingers lightly across the cracked screen, then said something quiet. "This one still works." Daniel nodded. "I know." Annie picked it up, held it for a second, then set it down gently, and only then, she reached for the new one, not as a replacement, as something new. "I'll keep both," she said. Daniel nodded. "That sounds right." That evening, after Daniel left, the apartment felt different again, but not in a tense way, in a finished way, like a chapter had closed. Annie sat by the window one more time, the old phone on one side, the new one on the other. She didn't open the video. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked outside, at the same street, the same people, the same world, but it didn't feel the same, because she wasn't the same. Not in a big way, not in a way anyone else would notice, but in a way that mattered. She had seen something wrong, and she had stood still when others moved past it. She had spoken when others stayed quiet, and it had changed something. Not everything, but something real. She leaned back slightly and whispered into the quiet room. It worked. Not the phone. Not the moment. Here, across the city, Ethan stood alone once more. The case had moved forward. The threat had been contained. The outcome had shifted. But his mind wasn't on any of that. It was somewhere else. A parking garage. A small voice. "I have this." He exhaled slowly, then said something to himself. "Yeah," he murmured. "You did." And just like that, the story reached its final turn. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with something far more lasting. A quiet truth, held firmly, spoken clearly, and carried forward by someone no one expected, but no one would forget. The story didn't end with the case. It ended with something quieter, something most people would never notice if they weren't paying attention. A week later, the city had already moved on. News cycles shifted. Headlines changed. Names disappeared from conversations that once held them tightly. But some things didn't disappear. They settled. They stayed. At school, Annie sat in her usual seat, her notebook open, her pencil moving steadily across the page. Mrs. Alvarez stood at the front of the room. "Today," she said, "I want you to write about a moment that changed how you see the world." The classroom buzzed softly. Kids leaned over their desks, whispering, thinking, asking questions. Annie didn't. She just looked down at the blank page, then started writing. There was a man who said something happened, but it didn't, and people believed him at first. But I saw what really happened. She paused, then continued. I didn't think I could help. But I did anyway. Another pause. Then, the world didn't change, but I did. She looked at what she wrote, then nodded. That was enough. Across the city, Ethan Whitmore sat in a room filled with people who now listened more carefully than they had before. Not because he demanded it, because something had shifted, not in power, in perception. You handled the situation efficiently, one board member said. Ethan didn't respond to the compliment. It was handled correctly, he said instead. Another member leaned forward. There's been positive response, he added. Public trust metrics are stabilizing. Ethan nodded once. That's expected. A pause. Then, what's next? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then he said something simple. We make sure it doesn't happen again. Back in Brooklyn, Monica stood at the window, watching Annie walk down the sidewalk toward the building. School bag, steady steps, no hesitation. She didn't look over her shoulder anymore. That was new. Monica smiled faintly, not because everything was perfect, but because something had settled into place, something strong. That afternoon, Annie sat on the steps outside the building, the old phone in her hands. She hadn't watched the video in days. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned it over, tracing the crack across the screen with her finger. It didn't bother her anymore. It reminded her, not of what almost went wrong, but of what went right. A shadow moved across the sidewalk. Annie looked up. Ethan stood a few steps away, not in a suit this time, just a coat. Less distance, more human. Hi, she said. Hi, he replied. He didn't step closer right away, didn't interrupt the space. Then he asked, Mind if I sit? Annie shrugged slightly. Okay. He sat down beside her, not too close, not too far. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Annie said, They said it's over. Ethan nodded. It is. She looked at him. Are you sure? Ethan considered that, then answered honestly. It's over enough, he said. Annie thought about that, then nodded. That makes sense. A pause. Then she held up the phone. It still works, she said. Ethan smiled slightly. I know. I kept it, she added. I'm glad you did. Another pause. Then Annie asked something simple. Are you going to be okay? Ethan looked at her, really looked, then said, Yes. A small silence followed. Then he added, Because of you. Annie shook her head slightly. No, she said. Because of the truth. Ethan's expression shifted just a little. Then he nodded. Yes, he said. Because of the truth. Across the street, life moved the way it always did. Cars passed. People talked. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just ordinary. But something inside that ordinary had changed. Not for everyone, but for the ones who knew where to look. Annie stood up. I have to go inside, she said. Ethan nodded. Of course. She started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. You know something? She said. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. What? Annie smiled faintly. It wasn't the phone. Ethan leaned back slightly. No? She shook her head. It was just me not staying quiet. Ethan nodded. That's usually what makes the difference. Annie seemed satisfied with that. Then she went inside. The door closed behind her. Ethan stayed where he was for a moment longer, watching the space she had just left. Then he stood, adjusted his coat, and walked away. Not rushed, not heavy, just steady. That night, Annie sat by the window one last time. The old phone on the table, the new one beside it. She didn't pick either one up. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked out at the street, at the same world, the same people, the same movement, and she understood something she hadn't before. The world doesn't change all at once. It changes in moments. Small ones, quiet ones, the kind most people miss, but not all of them. She rested her chin on her hand and whispered softly, "I'd do it again. Not for attention, not for reward, just because it was right." And somewhere, far beyond that small apartment, beyond offices and investigations and decisions, something had already taken root. Not fear, not power, something stronger. A reminder. That truth doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't even need to come from someone expected. It just needs someone willing to hold it and say, "I have this." And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. This story reminds us that truth does not depend on power, age, or status. It depends on courage. Annie, a 6-year-old girl with nothing but honesty and determination, proved that even the smallest voice can stand against injustice. In a world where people often believe what they see first, it takes strength to speak up when something feels wrong. The lesson is simple but powerful. Doing what is right is not always easy, but it always matters. Kindness, integrity, and courage, no matter how small they seem, can change lives, expose wrongdoing, and restore justice when no one else is willing to act. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.